This is the DualSense Edge. Is this thing good for fighting games? Let's talk about it. Right off the bat, I really did not want to get this controller, to be honest with you, because the DualSense is so bad for fighting games, particularly the D-pad. This D-pad is so bad with diagonals. And just by looking at it, it looks very similar, if not the same in terms of design, to the DualSense. So I was putting it off in terms of getting it, but it turns out there is one difference between this guy and this guy. And we'll talk about it when we get to the D-pad portion of the video. But for now, let's take a look at what's in the box. And in the box, you get this really nice case. Look at this. And then when you open it up, obviously you get a controller. On a lot of Pro controllers, you'll find special grips, like on this Razer controller here. But that's not the case with the DualSense Edge. On the inside and the back of the handle, there are these grooves or like patterns of PlayStation logos. So that makes it a little more grippy, but there's no rubber grips or anything on here, nothing special. This is a USB-C lock. If you put this on, it's gonna lock this braided cable that comes with it onto the controller. So whenever you yank it or whatever, it doesn't come out. This is a great idea. I love this. I typically like to play wired because I don't want to deal with any interference with Bluetooth. And by the way, the wire is pretty long. I could be wrong here, but it looks like it's about 10 feet long. You also get 4 paddles here. Unfortunately, you cannot use all of this at the same time. You only can use this 2 at a time. You get a choice between these paddles, very much like on the Xbox Elite controller. And by the way, these are magnetic, so you can just take it off. It's a little harder to take on and off because there's a little hole right here. But the good news is it's more secure when it's inserted versus on the Xbox Elite controller. These two are interchangeable, so you can put them on either side. And look at that, they don't come off. And personally, I actually prefer these shorter ones, these funny looking ones. And here's the reason why. When you hold your controller, it doesn't get in the way. You see that? And when you do want to use it, there you go. Just really short travel, super responsive. I love these. I think this is a better design than the paddles. With the paddles, your hand will always be constantly on it, and you're gonna accidentally activate one of these buttons if you squeeze the controller too hard. I prefer these little guys a lot better. This is one of the best implementation and design of a back paddle on any controller I've seen. In fact, I have not seen a design like this on any other Pro controllers. This is just great. So aside from the controller, you get 4 additional thumbstick caps. You can see the difference in length here. Unfortunately, these things are convex, meaning they are curved like a dome. To replace it, just yank this guy off, just put it in, and it'll just click in. Now the problem with this design is that your finger will just slip off. Look at this. Versus a design like this, where there's a little bit of a groove here. So when you're holding it, you got something to hold on to. You see that? There's resistance, but there's no such resistance over here. Your finger will just, yep. I don't know why Sony decided to do this. Instead of having the additional stick caps, look like this. This works perfectly fine. Why are we going back to this? And in terms of tension, they're essentially the same as the DualSense. There's quite a bit of resistance to them. In terms of the triggers, they feel exactly like on the DualSense, but now you have trigger locks. There's 3 positions. The shortest distance, and if you notice, this actually goes down pretty far. It goes down halfway. And in the medium setting, it goes down 3/4 of the way down. So it's pretty deep. And of course, this setting has no trigger lock, so it goes all the way. I kind of wish that the shortest setting would have less travel. This still feels like a trigger to me versus a feel of a button. You see the difference? On the back of the controller here, you'll see that there's a release lock. Oh, and inside you'll see that there are some levers. You can take the joystick module out. Isn't this cool? And you can replace these with new ones once they go bad. This is Sony's way of solving stick drifts. And right below the joysticks, you have 2 additional buttons. These are function buttons. Unfortunately, you cannot use this in-game. These are only menu navigation buttons. You can switch between profiles. You can adjust headphone volume or game and chat audio balance. Now let's get into how the buttons feel. Unfortunately, these buttons are still rubber dome based switches. They are okay. Just like on the DualSense, they don't have a lot of travel. These are spaced out pretty far apart, so it's kind of hard to press these 2 buttons at once. You have to have really big thumbs, and I do have pretty big hands with long fingers. And just like on the DualSense, they're not very loud. The shoulder buttons are great. I really like this. You can press it on whatever side that you want. And the tensions on the trigger feel pretty good. I think it's just right. And of course, these are adaptive triggers, just like on the DualSense. Alright, let's move on to the D-pad. This is what you came to the video for, so let's talk about it. I was skeptical about this D-pad just because it looks and feel the same as the DualSense D-pad. Now on the DualSense, whenever you press one of the edges, it's gonna do a diagonal. Even though you wanna do down, it's gonna do down back. And this will cause a lot of drop combos. Furthermore, this guy is loose. It wiggles. It rattles around. Now on the DualSense Edge, there is not a lot of wiggles at all. These buttons are bigger. Actually, you know what? I don't know if they're bigger or not. I really can't tell if these are bigger or the cutouts are smaller. But what I do know is there is very little gaps for these guys to wiggle around. And as a result, diagonals are infinitely better than on the regular DualSense. Up forward, up back, they work great. When I first realized this, I was just pumped. Because I really do like the DualSense overall, but the D-pad is just so bad. And now that issue is fixed for the most part with this new controller. I am super happy about that. However, with that being said, you can still trigger an accidental diagonal by pressing the edges of these buttons. So for example, I'm gonna press the edge up here and you see he's gonna jump. You see that? And the reason being is that all of these buttons are one piece. They're all connected. When I press the upper edge of the back button, it's gonna trigger the up button to get activated as well. So the problem is there. However, it's not as easily activated as on the regular controller. For the majority of the time, whenever you press a direction, it's gonna go that way. Unless you're really trying to press the edge. But the good news about all of these buttons being one piece is that it makes it easier to do motion input. Super easy to do.
Get ready. Come on, it's time to train. Just too slow. Not good enough.
The surface of the D-pad, just like on the DualSense, is pretty smooth for the most part. However, if you have sweaty fingers, it can get a little stickier, but I have no problem of going back and forth on this D-pad. However, I will say it's pretty uncomfortable on your thumb because the edges of the D-pad are sticking up over here. The edge of these buttons will dig into your thumb. Now, if you're doing this once or twice, it shouldn't matter, but over a course of a long session, you're gonna have to rub this edge against your thumb many times, and your thumb's gonna feel it. But you know what? That's gonna build character, right? You don't wanna have soft, delicate hands anyways. You want to have tough and all calloused thumbs. This is your badge of honor. In terms of how responsive these are responsive enough. For example, double taps works pretty well. These back paddles really help me with the Korean backdash in DualSense. It just makes it a lot easier. Look at this. Super quick. Piece of cake. The verdict on this D-pad is yes, it is good for fighting games. It's good for both 2D and 3D fighting games, and this is infinitely, and I mean infinitely better than the regular DualSense controller. When you plug this into the PS5, it's gonna automatically update and install the software for it into the settings. Go to Accessories, and you're gonna see the DualSense Edge wireless controller setting. It's pretty minimal here. There's not a lot to adjust. You can adjust what this function button does. The meat of it is gonna be going to the custom profiles. You have a choice of 4 profiles, and each corresponds to each of the face buttons here. And then you can customize each of these buttons. Unfortunately, you cannot program 2 buttons at once. You can only pick one at a time, and there's no shift functions or anything like on the Xbox Elite controller. You can adjust the sensitivity and the dead zone. It's very basic here. You're not gonna find anything fancy. Now, if you take this guy onto the PC, there is no software on the PC for this whatsoever. If you don't have a PS5 and want to play this on the PC, you're gonna have to buy a third-party app like DualSense X to customize this thing. Now, the good news is whatever customization that you do on the PS5, that will carry over onto Steam and on the PC. Alrighty, this is a little ridiculous. Let's go over the numbers. Minimum input delay, 0.62 milliseconds. Maximum, 1.92 milliseconds. On average, 0.9, so it's under 1 millisecond. And this is due to the insane polling rate at 1108 Hertz. Look at this. This is the fastest controller of any controller I've ever tested, ever. Input delay is essentially non-existent on this controller. It's crazy, even compared to the DualSense, which has great input delay numbers, but even then, it's nowhere compared to this. They really turned the polling rate up to the max here. Alright, now that was wired. I just did a wireless test. Minimum input delay is the same, 0.62. However, this is the problem with wireless. It's not very reliable and it's very inconsistent. We go from minimum of less than a millisecond to maximum of up to 47.51 milliseconds. So it's all over the place. But on average though, there's very little input delay at 1.59. And the polling rate is a lot less versus wired at 628. If you care about input delay at all, make sure you plug this bad boy in. I honestly cannot believe what I'm seeing. This is crazy. Final thoughts on this guy. This is a great upgrade over the DualSense. In addition to all of the added pro features, such as the trigger locks, the back pedals, and the ability to remove and replace these things, the biggest upgrade for this guy is actually the D-pad. And the change is not even that major, it's a minor change. They just made these buttons either bigger or the spaces between these buttons smaller. And that made a huge difference in terms of the accuracy of the D-pad. On top of that, this guy has the best input delay, the fastest input time of any controller I've ever tested. If you're a fan of fighting games, if you play on PlayStation, I would run out and buy this guy right away. Alright, that's gonna be it for me. Hopefully you found the video to be helpful. If you did, give it a like, subscribe for more, and take care now.